So today I want to go over some massive changes that the developers of Diablo 4 made from our open beta feedback. And to start off, there was a pretty significant overhaul to dungeons, starting out with dungeon layouts. One of the most common pieces of feedback we received is that players felt they were doing a lot of backtracking within certain dungeons. We have optimized multiple dungeons across all zones to minimize the need for backtracking. And they give a list of Fractured Peaks specific dungeons that they changed the layout of, but they also do say that they have changed dungeons in every zone. So I'd probably say that a significant portion of the dungeons in the game have had a look at and possibly had some layout changes. One of their biggest primary goals with this is changing where objectives are placed, so you don't have to go to one side to find an objective and then retrack back through a dungeon to get the other objective that you may have already cleared out half of that dungeon. And I think this is going to be one of the biggest changes for just the overall gameplay of dungeons, because now the objectives that you actually have to go to complete the dungeon are going to be placed in a way that you get to them organically and don't just have to go back through the entire dungeon multiple times to complete these objectives. Now, they also changed a lot of other gameplay within dungeons, starting off that the chance of an event to spawn in a dungeon has increased from 10 to 60%, which is absolutely massive. And these events should be anything that gives you the obol gambling currency anytime you complete them. And this is going to vary up dungeons quite a lot, because once you get one of these events to spawn in, you're pretty much stopping everything you were doing and doing that event. And I'm not 100% sure if the butcher or anything similar to that is also considered an event or not. And then we have a ton of other changes specifically labeled under dungeon gameplay. So first off, we have to reduce the need to backtrack, small numbers of straggling monsters will seek out the player to help complete the kill all monsters objective. So in certain dungeons, the objective is to just kill everything. And instead of literally needing to kill every single spawned enemy in this dungeon, now groups of monsters will specifically spawn in to seek you down to help you complete this. So you won't have to go find that one skeleton that was sitting in a corner somewhere. Now enemies will just keep coming to you over time. And then for the Animus dungeons, when Animus is gathered, the player and nearby allies will gain 10 of whatever their resources and reduce all active cooldowns by 1 second. So if you've never done these type of dungeons, the ones we saw in the Fractured Peak gave you an objective to kill Animus carriers until you fill up the bar, and all of these were elites, and then they would just drop an item that you walk over. Once you have enough of that, you would get to the next portion of the dungeon. So now they're making this much quicker and to kind of buff you up from doing this objective. Then depositing that anima to get to the next portion of the dungeon had its channel time reduced from 3 to 0 seconds. So now it's not a big channel, it's just instant, because I'm pretty sure you could also be interrupted in that channel, which would be quite annoying. The time to rescue was reduced from 3 to 1.5 seconds. Usually in these dungeons, the second half would be to rescue a certain amount of people. So now that's much quicker, which will also speed up the dungeon and make the gameplay just much more smooth. And all rescue objectives also drop a health potion upon completion now. So if you're in a much harder dungeon, maybe you need some extra health potions, this could help you out quite a bit into the end game. And then while carrying the ancient statue, bloodstone, mechanical box, or stone carving, you will receive a momentum bonus granting a 25% move speed increase to you and nearby allies. So this is any of the dungeons where you had to pick something up, go put it in the pedestal, and you had to do this 2 times. Quite a lot of the dungeons had this where you had to go to one side, get an item, one side get an item, and then put them on the pedestals and then open the door to the boss room. So now these are going to give you a pretty big movement speed bonus. And pedestals have had their channel time reduced from 2 to 0 seconds, so same as the Animus. And also returning a portable object to its pedestal now fully restores your health, resource, potions, and reduced cooldowns for all nearby players. So this is pretty massive as well. So now you're just pretty much resetting your character when you return one of these items to their pedestal. And this is going to be massive for getting you into the end boss, because you can put in the last item you need, open up the boss room, and you're completely reset. Because if you're doing a much more difficult dungeon, usually you would probably have to wait for your cooldowns and your health to recover before doing the boss anyway. So now it just speeds up the dungeon, makes it much more smooth and enjoyable. And now all structure objectives in dungeons have additional combat mechanics for players to overcome, just adding in more variation into the dungeon objectives. And their big philosophy behind these dungeon changes is to make the dungeons much more varied and to make them much more smooth and enjoyable. So there's not a lot of stopping and starting. You have to channel onto this item for 3 seconds. You have to go to the other side of the dungeon to pick this up. Now it's much more varied on the objectives you're doing. The objectives are quicker and there's a lot less backtracking backtracking to get to those objectives. And there was also quite a lot of class changes in this update, but I'm going to quickly go through all of them because a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. So first off, we have general. Effects like stun and freeze can be applied to elite monsters twice as long before they become unstoppable. Reviewed class skills to confirm that all classes have access to sufficient skills that remove control pairing effects. Many legendary powers have had updates to their effectiveness. Barbarian have had a flat 10% damage reduction added to them. Some skill tree passives have had their damage reduction effects reduced to compensate. Whirlwind skill deals more damage but consumes more fury, and the double swing skill enhancement refunds its full fury cost when used on a stunned or knockdown enemy. Under Druid, companion skills now deal heavily increased damage. All ultimate skills have had their cooldowns reduced. Usability improvements have been made to Maul and Pulverize. Using a non-shape-shifting skill will transform the Druid back to their human form. Under Necromancer, summon minions will die more often, requiring players to utilize corpse more often. Many bonuses in the Book of the Dead have had their stats increased. The damage dealt by corpse explosion has been reduced, and the brightness of skeleton warriors and mages have been reduced. Under Rogue, upgrades for subterfuge skills have had their bonuses increased. Multiple skill passives have had their bonuses increased, and all imbuement skills have had their cooldowns increased. Under Sorcerer, charge bolts damage was increased and the mana cost to cast has decreased. Decrease the damage of chain lightning and reduce its effectiveness against bosses. Decrease the cooldown of the incinerate skills enchantment bonus. Firewalls now spawn underneath enemies more frequently when using its enhancement bonus, and increase a lucky hit chance for the meteor's enchantment bonus. So quite a lot of community requested changes, especially for the reduced brightness of the Necromancer summons and some of the overall CC changes. And we add a handful of UI changes, but the most important ones is the move and interact inputs can now be mapped to one button, while the primary attack input is mapped to a secondary button. Pretty massive. This is actually something I went over in one of my videos where I thought this would be a pretty big change. And then the Sans serif font used in game has been replaced with a new serif font. So another big complaint for whatever reason was the font of the game not really fitting and being quite boring. So they have changed that as well. Then we have some changes for encounters, or I guess specifically bosses. Fix issues with the Butcher becoming unresponsive. The Butcher has been reevaluated for difficulty and will present a greater challenge in World Tiers 3 and 4, which I think is a very good change. This random Butcher encounter should be very difficult. Bosses such as Tachort, Maunok, Venard, and others were reevaluated for melee character difficulty, resulting in changes to attacks and fight mechanics. That was one of the biggest complaints for melee characters, that a lot of these bosses just were very difficult on melee characters. Half of the bosses had tons of just AoE slowing puddles. It was just really difficult for some melee characters. And then fix an issue where vampire brutes using the shadow enchant affix would chain, cast, impale. We got some pretty sizable changes for cellars as well. Increase the chance for a dungeon effect to occur in cellars. Cellars now consistently reward a chest upon completion. Fix an issues where cellars would prematurely be marked as complete. Fix an issue where the guaranteed elite monster would be absent from the cellar. And cellars are actually going to be much more important once you get into the end game, and I think this was the reason they were actually made, is because cellars are also going to be an objective for the Tree of Whispers, which is basically going to be the bounty system in the end game. So they're going to be pretty important, and I think they're going to be much more important than what they were led on to seem to be in the public beta, because they basically were all the same room layout. They all look pretty similar and was basically just like a random pack of enemies in there. So this should make them quite a bit different, and as you get later into the game, they'll have much more reason to be there and to be completed. And then we have some small quality of life changes. Fix an issue where players could increase attack speed by move canceling attacks earlier. Very nice that they got this before the game was launched. I think you could technically get like infinite attack speed from this. Fix an issue where characters weren't immune and untargetable after loading into an area. This is massive for people on older consoles or older PCs, especially hardcore players, because you could say load into or out of a dungeon and there would be a group of enemies there and they would be attacking you and damaging you before you are even done loading. And then probably the most controversial change, the reset dungeon button has been disabled. Now the big reason they're doing this is because some of the dungeons were much more lucrative to constantly replay. I even did a video on the best dungeon to farm in the beta, because some of them, more specifically the Animus dungeons, were just incredibly strong for just refarming, and especially just refarming the first part. And the main reasoning they gave for this is they want people people to be doing all the different dungeons, not just the most efficient ones, and you're still able to replay dungeons by partying up with others and having them start the dungeon, and they're working on another fix to allow you to repeat or reset dungeons. And the example they gave that they're looking into is that you're able to reset a dungeon a certain amount of times before you're not able to reset it for a while. And I'm surprised they didn't actually take how World of Warcraft dungeons or instances work, where you can reset dungeons or enter new dungeons 10 times in an hour. They could have something similar to that and just probably increase it a little bit more. But I think it's going to end up coming down to the system they implement to allow us to repeat dungeons. But it makes complete sense why they don't want the system to be used how it was being used, because with that in the game, what the end game would boil down to is find the one dungeon that's the most efficient, and every single person would just farm that one exact same dungeon. And also keep in mind that they are doing their next developer live stream on April 20th at 11 a.m. PDT time. That's going to be on Twitch and YouTube. And this is going to be an end game focused live stream. So if you want to see more about the end game, I'd recommend watching this, because it does also sound like they're going to be revealing something new within this live stream that none of the community has heard about yet. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.